Okay. Kissy, how are you?
I am doing good. I'm doing good. How are
All
you?
right, all right. And Brandon, hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Okay. And that Imani, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
It's a pleasure meeting you. We haven't met before, but Brandon brought you in, so I appreciate you, especially at the last minute joining.
Well, I'm
Uh,
glad. Thank you for the invitation. Happy
Thank
to be
you great,
here.
great, great. Um, okay. I think you have your plans, right, correct? How to proceed as moderators, Brandon?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. We
So,
just wanted to make sure that we knew the timing of everything. Imani, I know
mhm.
you wanted to kind of go over that a little bit.
Mhm. The timing?
Yeah.
Well, I think we still have like 5 minutes. If the person starting is gonna do it for 5 minutes, then we still have five free minutes there. They're gonna be free. I don't know if we can all just before you introduce him in the 5 minutes, we kind of like use them for the viewers to also connect with you as a moderator going to be presenting. I think it's only, an moral effect. So you just don't come in and just say, my name is Brandon, and then starting also that I just don't come in at the end, giving questions that like, wait a minute, who is she?
Mm.
So I think if the one starting leaves us with those minutes, we shall use them that way. If they don't, then you will go on again and introduce the guest.
Okay, yeah. And I was thinking we could also just have everybody introduce in the beginning, and that way when we get to the end, we can just go straight to questions, just
Right.
in case we're short on time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have our first viewer?
We have somebody here, Munachiso Ozioko, you're welcome. The recording is on. So I think people are just kind of coming in.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, um, just give.
Oh, Professor, you're muted.
Okay. Our admin can make me co-host along with Brandon and Imani and Chizzy, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Let's see if I can buzz her. Admin Ojinwa, if you can do that, just give me a minute. Let me check. Give me a minute, let me check.
Professor, you're muted.
She's having connection issues, but she will be joining us shortly. In a few minutes, joining our admin. Okay. We maybe give a minute or two, and then we can get going. Welcome everyone. We'll start this session in a couple of minutes. We have the principal parties hear our guest speaker, Dr. Igwe, and the two moderators. We are blessed to have two moderators today for this panel, or for this session. The recording is on. We hope to share the recording given the interest expressed on this forum. I know this is a busy time, Christmas and the holiday festivities. At the same time, we must take care of our mental health. So we'll definitely be able to have the recording to share afterwards. Yeah, if you can mute unless when you're ready to speak or when called upon to speak, that'll be helpful to avoid interruptions. We'd appreciate it.
And will we be using the chat as well for people to ask questions or maybe comment in the chat? Is that something we'll be doing?
Yes, yes. The chat features are on. As moderator, you can run it. I think our admin is on now. So I have you as co-host as well as our guest speaker and Imani. I'm going to do that. Okay.
Okay, you are now co-host. Hello? Dr. Wazie?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Okay, you are now co-host.
Okay, thank you. Do the same for our guest speaker, Chizi Igwe and Brandon, moderator, and Imani, please. Thank you very much.
I don't know that I can have multiple co-hosts. I can just allow anybody to share whenever they want to.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll allow everybody to be able to share content.
Okay, let's have the guest speaker then as co-host. Let's see if that will work.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started here. About 5:34. I think we do have a critical mass, and we'll certainly have our guest speaker, Dr. Chizi Igwe, here, and our two able moderators, Brandon and Imani, would take on shortly and run this program for us. On behalf of Africa House Sacramento, I welcome each and every one of you to this forum, looking at the issue of mental health, specifically prevention and management of depression, which we know is an issue that is real, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, and has become even worrisome and more pronounced within our African diaspora community. We can no longer deny its existence or have it as a taboo. I believe the more we can talk about it and learn about that and become educated, the more likely we are to address the problem, the elephant in the room. So I thank each and every one of you for joining us this evening for this forum, and I hope that you will find the information useful, and more importantly, that you're able to apply the information and share that information that you received. It's part of Africa House Sacramento Bridging the Gaps series. And we are very fortunate, in fact, to have our young people leading us this evening as our guest speaker, Dr. Chizi Igwe. I think the proud mother, Mrs. Chinyere Igwe, I saw her earlier on here. And I'm not sure if the father will be joining from where he is, somewhere in Africa, Mr. John Igwe. Brandon Lupago and Imani, our young compatriots, will be leading us. Oh, okay, I see iPhone somewhere. Mr. John Igwe.
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Okay, thank you for joining. We'll be moderating the sessions. They will introduce themselves briefly and run the program with us, including the guest speaker. I acknowledge the collaboration with Afri Peace and Development Foundation and the Center for African Peace and Conflict Resolution at California State University, Sacramento, and the City of Sacramento Fuel Grant Project in collaboration with many immigrant organizations working for the education and capacity building of immigrant communities, especially in the city of Sacramento and beyond. Please hold your questions. I think after the guest speaker, you will be able to ask those questions. I believe you have some questions. Use the chat features, and I'm going to let Brandon and Imani take it up from here. And at some point, we'll be chatting more about Africa House Sacramento and our upcoming programs. And we do also have a community survey that I'll probably post the link in the chat. If you'd be kind enough to complete that link for us, complete the community survey for us, that would be most appreciated. Last spring, we had a series of sessions related to young people and the family. And it was actually, especially the African diaspora youth. It was from those programs that the idea of this forum on the mental health came up. And since that time, there have been a series of incidents, including suicides, that have happened in our community, yes, including in our own Sacramento community, not even talk about our neighboring communities in the Bay Area or Southern California and elsewhere. Like I said, it's something that is real and present at different levels. Overall mental health, especially since the COVID-19, that we can benefit from learning about that. Without much ado, again, welcome. I'll now turn it over to Brandon and Imani. And I recognized our Africa House Sacramento board members present, as well as partners present. Brandon, Imani, thank you very much. Pick it up from here. You can take it from here.
Yes, thank you, Professor, and good evening, everybody. I believe Imani was trying to send housekeeping rules into the chat. There we go. So we'll keep it short because we are short on time and we want to respect everybody's time. We know it's Christmas time and everybody has things to do. So we'll just do some quick intros and then I'll introduce Dr. Igwe and then we'll take it from there. So my name is Brandon Luquago. I'm a first-year medical student at UC Davis School of Medicine, the Sacramento campus, and I will let Imani go ahead and introduce herself as well.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Thank you for inviting me here. And my name is Imani. I am an emotional support counselor. I've been in the mental health field, I don't know, since when I knew it could affect me. So I'm very passionate about it. Professionally, I am an IO psychologist professional. And thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here to learn with each one of you all.
Oh, there we go. And so I'll go ahead and introduce our guest speaker. If you haven't already read his bio, Dr. Igwe is a child of 2 Nigerian immigrants who grew up in the Sacramento area alongside his 3 siblings. He did his doctorate in clinical psychology from the Wright Institute in Berkeley, California. And Dr. Chizi is a therapist who supports children, adolescents, families, and college-age populations from a trauma-informed and multicultural perspective. He is currently a postdoctoral resident at UC Davis Student Health and Counseling Services. And with that, Dr. Igwe, I will give the floor to you.
All right, thank you, and hello, everyone. Allow me to just share my screen real quick. I am assuming that people can see my screen, but if you cannot, feel free to let me know.
Open that. I want to, because when you get in,
Much better.
I get out the elevator.
right.
Because sometimes you get in the elevator, it shuts you off. That's why I
And
haven't.
so I'm hearing noise. I'm not sure if we're good. We're good. We're good. All right. So hello, everyone. As mentioned before, my name is Chizi Igwe. I am a doctor of clinical psychology. And today we will be dancing with the blues and having a discussion about depression and suicide among children, adolescents, and young adults. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a heads up about the content of today's presentation. This presentation will discuss content such as depression, suicide, and other potentially triggering topics. At any time during this presentation, for whatever reason, please feel free to mute me, turn your camera off, leave the meeting, or do whatever else you need to do to take care of yourself. And yes, without further ado, let's talk about the blues. Born out of post-Civil War American South, the blues is a highly influential music genre pioneered by Black Americans. This genre of music was unique in the sense that artists would use music to fully express their emotional experiences. This often included themes of deep emotional pain and sadness. Nowadays, we often refer to feeling sad as having the blues. And for children, adolescents, and young adults, the blues has never been stronger, particularly talking about depression. What is depression? Well, I can easily provide my own answer to the question, but my assumption is that people are coming into this presentation with a lot of their own preconceived notions of what depression is. Because of this, I wanted to instead start off with a reflection activity. Feel free to keep your answers to yourselves. You don't need to share, but I'm going to give you a prompt, and I just want you to think about certain things related to the prompt. I'm going to ask you to imagine somebody who is depressed. So think of a depressed person. What do they look like? What do they do? How do they act? What do they believe in? Why are they depressed? And what else is important to know about them? Just give yourself a few moments to really think about this depressed person. Can't give you too long as we're trying to keep in time, but really, yeah, just think about this person. Does everybody have someone in mind? We good? Cool. And so once again, keep your answers to yourself. But I'm personally curious how many people, when thinking about a depressed person, thought about someone who is homeless. We've all seen homeless people, right? Especially if you live in California. I mean, they have to be depressed, right? Or maybe somebody who has been abused. I mean, they have a good reason to be depressed, and so it only makes sense. Or how about someone who's unemployed? I mean, they have nothing else to do in the day other than be depressed, so that would make sense. And then maybe even a psych patient, like someone literally getting care for mental health, maybe they're depressed. How many people thought about an atheist? I mean, if you don't believe in God, how can you believe in joy, right? And then once again, we're not answering out loud, so no need to feel shame. But how many people thought about a white person? they're often displayed as the poster children for depression. So it would make sense if you thought about them, right? These all could have been your answer. But then I'm curious, how many people thought about a college student? Somebody with so much potential and a bright future. Could they be depressed? Or maybe a doctor, the person that every African parent wants their child to be. Can a doctor be depressed? Or how about a professional athlete? Potential millionaires playing the game they love. How could they be depressed? Or a lawyer, super confident, bright individual. Can they be depressed? We mentioned atheists before, but how many people thought about a pastor? Can someone whose life is devoted to serving God be depressed? And then one step further, how many people thought about your friends, your siblings, if you have any, maybe your cousins, or for the caregivers in the audience, how many people thought about your own children? And then getting really deep, how many people thought about yourself? I guess the reason why I give all of these examples and wanted to start with this reflection is really just to emphasize that depression doesn't have a stereotypical look. Anyone can experience depression, literally anyone. I think a lot of times we like to think of things like, there's no way that my family could be depressed. We have nothing to be depressed about. Or, oh, my friend isn't depressed. He's laughing all the time. He's happy. Or for some parents out there, they think, my kids aren't depressed. I'm a good parent. If my kids were depressed, I'd be a bad parent. There's this saying that my mom used to say. It's that we never think that it can happen to us until it happens to us. And if we're going by the data, it probably has already happened to us. We probably already know somebody struggling with depression. And how can that be? Well, unfortunately, we are in the middle of a global youth mental health crisis. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the quality of life for youth mental health, the quality of youth mental health was already on the decline. But since the pandemic hit, things have only gotten drastically worse. Currently, 1 in 4 teens globally meet the criteria for clinical depression. In 2023, 50% of young adults aged 18 to 24 reported anxious and depressive symptoms. And even though it's not as common in pre-adolescent children, childhood depression is still on the rise as well. And I know hearing this, people are like, well, that's not us, right? We're good. We're African. We don't get depressed. And maybe you don't want to hear it from me. I'm just some guy giving his presentation in his office. Nice office, as some people have told me, but an office nonetheless. Maybe you don't want to hear it from me. Maybe you want actual data. Well, let's look at some data, specifically focusing on a little country we all know as Nigeria. According to the World Health Organization, Nigeria has the highest rates of depression in all of Africa. In fact, 3.9 Nigerian citizens report experiencing depressive symptoms. I don't know the exact population of Nigeria off the top of my head, but I assume that's a lot of people. Going even deeper, some studies have shown that 25% of Nigerian young adults and 21% of Nigerian teens experience depressive symptoms. And the general consensus among the scientific community is that these numbers are probably underreported and likely much higher. These numbers have only been increasing since the pandemic started. But then that might raise another question. Why? Why are the youth today more depressed than us? I think that some people could be thinking about their experiences growing up in Africa or having to immigrate to another country, working for everything they had. Meanwhile, their kids go to fancy schools, spend all day playing video games. Why should they be depressed? They have it good. Well, there are multiple reasons, but the main ones I wanted to talk about today were that we're living in different times. I'm by no means saying that people, by no means saying that people today have it better or worse, and that people in the past had it better or worse. My dad, for example, he came to America as a young adult on his own in America, had to figure things out on his own, and then eventually needed to provide for his whole family. And I would never say that he had it easy, but I also wouldn't say that the youth today have it easy. I would say they just have different problems. For example, they have to deal with living, growing in a global pandemic, or they also have to live in a country that literally hates them just because of the color of their skin. Social media, though having its positives, also has a lot of negatives. And then my favorite, student loans. We have so many student loans to pay, it makes sense that we'd be depressed. And that's just scratching the surface in terms of all the problems that the youth today have to face. They aren't necessarily worse than the problems of the past generation, but they're not really easier ever. They're just different. Then we also, another reason why depression is on the rise is because we just have better knowledge of what mental health is. We know more about depression than it was before. Maybe in the past, some people might have been depressed, but not have been able to say they're depressed because they didn't know what depression is. Now we live in a society where more and more people are able to say, oh, maybe I'm depressed. There's a little less stigma. And so you feel at least a bit more open to say I might be depressed. There are many other reasons as well, but these are just a few of the main ones. And it's important that we talk about these things because of the many unfortunate effects it can have on our youth. Depression can affect our youth physically, whether it's not feeling motivated to get up and move or experiencing physical illnesses precipitated by depression. Mentally, as depression can affect our ability to keep focus. Emotionally, as people who experience depression might either experience extreme levels of depression or complete lack of emotion due to numbness. Socially, as depression causes many people to self-isolate. Practically, believe it or not, one of the first things that goes when people experience a depression episode is hygiene. So practically speaking, people might not feel motivated to say, go to shower or brush their teeth. And finally, spiritually, depression might change a person's view on life and their values. Depression can also contribute to substance use, acting out, disconnecting from friends and family, educational challenges, not only because feeling depressed affects your ability to do well, but also it can make you feel the pressure to do perfectly. So you get an A-. That can be extreme in a depressive episode. Same thing with professional challenges for our young adults. And then childhood depression can eventually develop into adult depression. But finally, one of the biggest risks of youth depression is its potential connection to suicide. Of course, not every depressed person will attempt to die from suicide. Please, one thing I'm gonna ask from y'all, please don't leave this presentation today thinking that all depressed people commit suicide. That's not true. However, it does happen. So what is suicide? Suicide is the act of killing oneself. It often occurs within the context of depression, but it can also occur within the context of other situations as well, such as substance use, psychotic disorders, trauma, experiencing difficult life transitions, and risk-taking behaviors or accidental death. I also wanted to stress again that while many people who die from suicide are depressed, being depressed does not automatically mean that somebody's going to attempt to die from suicide. It doesn't even mean that somebody's considering suicide. I also just wanted to share some statistics around suicide. So suicide is the 18th leading cause of death in the world, but that's only because the other 16 are a variety of physical illnesses. For non-physical illness causes, suicide is actually number 2, only behind road injuries. Globally, more than 700,000 people die from suicide a year. And in 2021, there were reportedly 1.7 million suicide attempts in the US alone. And then if we wanted to look at Africa, the suicide rate in Africa is 11 deaths per 100,000 people. That's higher than the global average of suicide rate, which is 9 per 100,000 people. In fact, 6 of the top 10 nations in suicide rate are African countries, with Lesotho leading the world by a large margin. And then focusing on youth, suicide is the second leading cause of death in the US for youth between the ages of 10 and 25. Between 2000 and 2021, youth suicide rates have actually increased by over 50%. For Black youth specifically, it actually went up by 144%. In 2020, 25.5% of young adults considered dying from suicide, and 18.8% of high school students considered dying from suicide. In 2022, 45% of LGBTQIA+ youth seriously considered dying from suicide. And finally, a scary statistic for caregivers, 90% of teens who considered suicide believe that their parents do not understand them. Obviously, this could just be because teens in general don't think that parents understand them, but I think it also speaks to how youth feel caregivers perceive mental health, to the point where they feel that they could be struggling with these thoughts and not feel comfortable talking to their parents about it. So I imagine that this data and hearing these things can be discouraging for some, scary for others. However, there's one more data point I wanted to mention. 94%. 94% of what? 94% of people believe that suicide is, at the very least, sometimes preventable. This shows that there's hope, that depression and suicide aren't guarantees, that we could dance with the blues. When I mention dancing with the blues, what I really mean is preparation, management, and prevention. Preparing for depression before it comes in, managing depressive symptoms when they arise, and then preventing suicide. When preparing for depression, it's important to start as soon as possible. Depression can come out of nowhere, and though there are warning signs for depression, it's almost impossible to predict when or if a person will end up experiencing depression. Because of this, it's important to be prepared and live a lifestyle that can decrease the impact of potential depressive episode. Whether you're a youth who's never experienced depression, a youth who has experienced depression in the past, or a caregiver, now is the time to prepare for depression. For youth, preparing for depression could look like educating yourself, practicing self-care, establishing a healthy routine, learning healthy ways to manage stress, paying attention to your physical health, practicing self-love and grace, and finding your social supports. For caregivers, you can help in depression prep by modeling what self-care looks like, by educating yourself about depression, by helping youth prepare for depression, maybe doing self-care together or going for a walk together, and finally, creating space for them to talk about depression, but at the same time, never forcing the conversation. It's also important to prepare for depression by knowing about the symptoms of depression so you can take care of it before it becomes a huge problem. These symptoms include lowered mood, a loss of interest in activities that used to bring you joy, changes in sleep patterns, feeling tired all the time, lowered self-esteem, and feelings of hopelessness. These are the common symptoms, but there are also symptoms that are often overlooked. These include overworking, self-isolation, an increase in anger, especially in male-identified individuals, physical symptoms and illnesses, especially if the doctor says that everything's actually fine, a change in personality, weight fluctuations, and forcing oneself to be happy. These can be potential warning signs for depression. But of course, as much as we need to prepare for things, it's possible that you could still end up feeling depressed.
Notice anything?
And for youth, the first step in managing depression is to know that it's okay to
I still have a lot.
rest. Don't be too hard
Should
on
I bring them
yourself
to
for being
Houston or just
depressed.
wear glasses?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
So don't be too hard on yourself for being depressed. It
Like,
happens to
right,
the
it's like-
best of us. Instead, it's important to be kind to yourself, or at least as kind as possible. You should ask for help if you need it. Take some time for yourself, maybe even take a day off. Keep your routine. Don't give up on the routine, as it's one of the key things in overcoming depression. Get some movement in your life if you can. You don't need to do a full cardio exercise, but maybe a walk. And then practice healthy coping mechanisms while avoiding negative ones. And finally, consider getting professional help. I know that therapy can be expensive. I know because I'm a therapist, but there are low-cost options for therapy. For example, if you go to college, therapy is often free. So consider giving it a chance. As for caregivers, I wanted to share some things that you should not do when helping someone manage depression. Please don't dismiss or invalidate your child's experiences. Also, please, 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 no unsolicited advice. Don't be impatient with your child or overpunish them for not doing something. But at the same time, don't allow them to just get away with everything just because they're depressed. And then also, just to be clear, I am a huge fan of prayer. I prayed before this meeting. I'm gonna pray after this meeting. I pray all the time. But also, don't just tell your kids to pray the pain away. That'll just leave them feeling invalidated. Also, don't immediately dismiss the concept of therapy or medication. And finally, don't forget to take care of yourself. Instead, validate your child's experience, even if you don't fully understand it. Listen to your children, and if they ask, then offer advice. Be patient with your kids when they're experiencing depression, but also don't just let them do whatever they want. Kind of when your kid's sick, it's like you won't be mad at them if they stay in bed a bit longer, but also they're gonna have to get out of bed eventually. Also, keep praying. Tell your kids to pray when they feel depressed. Prayer is such a powerful thing that you can use if you are a religious person and are feeling depressed. However, also take action. God gives us agency and doesn't want us to just sit around and have him hear everything. He would want us to take action as well. So pray and take action. And then at the very least, consider the possibility of therapy and medication. And finally, if your kid is feeling depressed, increase your self-care as well. Don't decrease it. So that's managing depression. But then about suicide. I often tend to take a shame-free approach to suicidal management. And what does that mean? Well, if you're a child, teen, or young adult experiencing suicidal thoughts, it's okay to think about suicide. And I know some people are hearing this and they're kind of like, is he saying ET's okay? Which, 1 second, let me explain. People cannot control their thoughts. Unfortunately, our thoughts are just our thoughts. We can't control them. We can't choose which thoughts come up for us. However, we can control our response to these thoughts. I can think about wanting to drink an ice cold vanilla Coke, but that doesn't mean that I'm gonna grab a vanilla Coke. I can use my actions to control the way I respond to these thoughts and get a water instead. And so thinking about suicide doesn't mean that you're gonna attempt to die from it. Instead, people shouldn't punish themselves or others for having thoughts related to suicide. Rather, you should take action against these thoughts. This can look like finding somebody to talk to, taking care of yourself, allowing yourself to feel, and finally, considering therapy if you can. But while managing suicidal thoughts is important, the most important thing is preventing suicide attempts. We all have the power to prevent suicide before it becomes a problem. Suicide prevention involves being aware of the warning signs, creating space to talk about suicide, but not forcing it, and suicide-proofing your environment. Warning signs for suicide include depression. Now, once again, being depressed doesn't automatically mean you're going to attempt to die from suicide. Suicide notes are also a warning sign. Suicide threats, previous attempts to die from suicide, and then giving stuff away or saying final goodbyes. As for talking about suicide, I understand that talking about suicide can be very scary. I'm a therapist and even I get uncomfortable sometimes talking about it. However, not talking about suicide does not prevent suicide from happening. If anything, it only makes it worse. So how do you talk about suicide? Well, for youth, you should find somebody you feel safe talking to, preferably a caregiver, but maybe it's a mentor or a teacher or a religious leader. And then only share what you feel comfortable sharing. And feel free to feel the way you feel. If you cry while talking about suicide, that's okay. And for caregivers, make sure that you present yourself as a safe person to talk about mental health with. Don't get mad at your child if they have thoughts about suicide. It really just means that they're really in pain and really need help. Also, don't force the conversation. If they don't want to talk about it now, talk about it later. Just make sure that eventually you end up talking about it. And finally, if you're not the person to have the conversation, if you feel like you're not equipped to have the conversation, that's okay too. You're not alone. You can have your child talk to a sibling or a priest or pastor, or even a therapist like me. Also for caregivers, many youth who attempt to die from suicide will use objects readily available for them. And so that's why it's important to consider accessibility of certain objects in your home. If you have firearms, how accessible are they? Are they locked up, or can anybody grab them when they want? For medication, of course, if you trust your child, no need to lock up the medication. They might need it. But if you have concerns, maybe consider locking up the medication, or at the very least, have a conversation about it. And then same with poisonous chemicals and sharp objects as well. And then finally, it's important to have knowledge about certain crisis resources and numbers. I left a good amount of these on screen. There are also thousands of different crisis lines. We have also warm lines if it's not necessarily an emergency, but you need somebody to talk to. There are plenty of warm lines as well. I would strongly encourage those who have phones to pull out their phone, take a quick picture of this screen, just so you can have them if you weren't aware of these resources. I'm gonna slowly change to the next slide as people hopefully get these in. All right, I'm gonna switch. And yeah, in conclusion, I just wanted to emphasize that at the end of the day, depression can be hard. It's hard to talk about, hard to experience, and hard to understand. However, similar to the blues, depression isn't all doom and gloom. There can be joy in it as well. Many blues songs are sad, but they have just as many blues songs about happiness or love. Same with depression. Some days are bad, some days are worse, but some days are okay. Some days there's hope, and some days you can dance with the blues. Thank you for your time, and I will turn it back to our wonderful moderators.
All right, thank you, Dr. Igwe. That was very helpful, beautiful overview of depression for those people who are unaware of that. I think it's a very important issue in our community, especially as Africans and African Americans. And so with that, sorry, you guys, if I forgot to mention, I'm your moderator for the night, as well as Imani. My name is Brandon Lukwago. I'm a first-year medical student at UC Davis. And so we would like to open up the floor for questions. If anybody has any questions regarding depression, regarding his presentation, feel free. You're free to type them in the chat as well. If you're uncomfortable speaking on the microphone, feel free to turn your camera on if you feel comfortable doing so. There's no pressure here.
Right. That was a lot to unpack. Thank you so much, Cheesy. It was a lot of good information. I'm sure so many people have questions because most of the points that you mentioned, I would say somehow a bit contradict with our culture as Africans. So questions like validating and listening, that's something that we, the older or even our older parents, haven't yet embraced as yet. And then when you said it's okay to cry, are you kidding me? Which one are you gonna tell to cry in this generation? Like it's really, and then it was a lot. It was a lot to unpack. And then the beginning, I'm sure most people when they were thinking, they thought along the points that you gave. But most of us did not put ourselves first. And there's all these reasons as to why. So I would like to really see what the audience has, how do you relate with all this? The whole presentation. Do you have any questions? Brandon, any questions you'll have to pick up in the comment section? Seeing somebody say in the comment section. But the presentation was lovely. So maybe I should start the questions by asking, how do we find balance? Especially with our culture. Yes, we've heard the information, things we've talked about, validation, listening, crying. Those are all things that are very foreign to us, especially for people who come from collective communities. And how do we find that balance so that we can find that confidence in addressing these things from the parents' perspective and then also from our youth and children's perspective? How do we bridge that gap? Because trust me, I was just mind blown with all these things according to our cultures.
Yeah, I think balance is something that I'm still trying to figure out as well. So I'm not going to give a perfect answer by any means. But what I will say is definitely like, on one hand, there are plenty of things that we grew up culturally that it's like, oh, these aren't necessarily like related to the things I mentioned, like strength, being very strong, children not more being like seen than heard. But at the same time, I would make the argument that there is that our culture actually does relate to a lot of those things. Like one of the things I mentioned was needing to have support for others and like finding that support group. Our culture is very collectivist. When I was growing up, I had like 1,000 uncles and aunties. And even if I like needed the littlest thing, they were there for me. So I think that it really comes from starting with ourselves and really being able to notice the things within our culture that we can bring and kind of use that for that healing. And then also in terms of balance, self-care is always important. So I honestly recommend self-care, strongly recommend self-care if you could get it in. But yeah.
All right, so we do have a few hands up, by Dr. Bethel. You're going first. We're going to choose you so you can, submit your question. Thank you so much.
Hi, yes, hi everybody. I'm enjoying the presentation because my question is this: why do we have so many depressions among our students, among our people, especially the youth? I'm using myself as an example. One of the things I noticed is that most of our people, most of the parents, they want their children to study certain things, go to medical school, become lawyers. Some of them are not interested in those fields, but we kind of push them towards those areas. To me, I think this is one of the experiences I got because my daughter doesn't like medical nursing, but I want her to become a nurse, go to medical school. She doesn't like it. And then she's having difficulty studying those subjects. Do you think that could be one of the reasons why we have so much depressed children among our people, our students, our young adults?
I think that there is definitely a potential that it could be there. I think there are always so many factors within depression that it's usually not just one thing. It could be stress from school, not doing as well as you are in school. It could be maybe just something happening on the outside. Maybe it's the fact that the world, we have everything happening in the Gaza Strip. We have so many types of prejudice and racism in our communities. There are so many reasons to explain why our youth could be depressed, and it's hard to pinpoint the exact one. I think overall, it really just comes down to how the youth is experiencing it currently as to the past, where in the past we were really encouraged to kind of be strong, put our heads down, not complain. And now we are trying to recognize how dangerous that could be. And so now we're being more open with our emotions and being more willing to admit that, hey, I might be depressed. And so long way to just say it could be a multitude of things, and different for every person.
Just to add on to what you said, Dr. Yue, I think it also comes down to what the individual values themselves. So if you think of it from that perspective, if you're telling somebody to pursue a career or something that they don't necessarily value themselves, or maybe they don't value money, maybe they value relationships more than status, career, or whatever it may be, they will be depressed being forced to go down that route. So I think just thinking in terms of what does an individual value, and if they are not in line with their values, they may be more susceptible to depression. So that was a very great question, Dr. Bethel, and great explanation, Dr. Igwe.
Well, we have another hand up, and that is, looks like our admin, Ngozi. Please go right ahead. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Imani. Dr. Chizi, that was a wonderful presentation. Very, very great presentation. A lot of pointers. I really appreciate all that you have said. I have a comment which, in line with the things you said and the things that were brought to my mind from an experience, and then I have a question. There was before. It's something that happened to a family that I know in Los Angeles area. Nigerian parents, and their son was doing so well. The future seemed so bright, great in sports, wonderful job, everything going so well. And then one day, he called the siblings and the mom that he loved them. He called the father saying, "Dad, I want to talk to you." The dad said, "Oh, I'm on my way to church. I'm running late. Can we talk later?" The son drove to a friend's house, parked his car in the driveway, didn't even go in, and shot himself. Mm. Now, in hindsight, The dad was wishing he didn't even go to church at all, but stayed and listened to the child. I'm sure it was his cry for help, wanting to talk to somebody. Maybe if he had talked to the father, he wouldn't have ended up carrying out what he had in mind. So it brings to mind what you said, paying attention and being available to listen, which is very, very important. But he had everything going for him. And you mentioned all people being, people look at you on the surface, everything seemed to be going so well. And you wonder, why would this person kill themselves? And the person was actually a relationship problem he was having with a girlfriend, and he thought the girl was cheating on him. Something as simple as that, So it really makes us to be more conscious, to be more intentional, and pay attention and have time to discuss with our children to find out what's going on with them, make them feel comfortable about coming to us at any point in time to tell us what they are thinking or feeling. So thank you so much for all that reminder. My question is regarding the statistics you gave about Nigerian, both Nigeria and then Africa. I know I have a concern sometimes with some statistics when they lump Africa together. Africa is a continent with people of different cultures and religions. And I know there are some cultures and religions that support suicide and even encourage it, in certain situations than others. And all of them are in Africa. So it's difficult to really know where the greater number is coming from that is making the number very high. And I know there is suicide tendencies in every culture, but I'm just concerned about the statistics. It would be nice if we could have a clearer, a better idea. Maybe it will help us understand why the rates are high in some areas than in others. And I know in the United States, sometimes it's broken down into ethnic groups for us to see, because one ethnic group may have a higher rate than the others. It's just a thought that occurred to me. But thank you very much for that wonderful presentation.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that tragic story as well. And I think, yeah, it really is kind of like statistics only give you like a snapshot. It could go a lot deeper. What I do know is that in terms of the countries in Africa that tend to have the highest suicide rates, a lot of them tend to be in, tend to be in the southern part of Africa. And so that is definitely something that is interesting. And I think that overall, in terms of getting more data into like how it presents to people, it really calls us for us to have more research around depression and suicide in Africa, in every country, in specific populations within these countries. And it really comes down to us as a people wanting to be more, taking suicide and depression more seriously. Once that's done, then we'll have more data on that.
All right, just so we don't lose anybody in the chat, we have a question from Valdez. Can you expand a little more about how childhood depression could go into adulthood depression and what that would look like?
Yes. And so I believe that based on my experience working with children and adolescents, I think when childhood depression first starts, it can range from like very little to very apparent. And so I think when it starts there, those are really the prime times for intervention. If you're a parent, helping this person cope with the depressive symptoms, helping this person get therapy or some type of support. And I think what happens when childhood depression goes untreated, it can develop into depression in adulthood. And that, once again, looks different for everybody. But I know that in some cases, it can lead to, say, as I mentioned before, Educational problems. Maybe this person really struggled in school and just didn't end up getting into college. Professional problems. Maybe this depression causes this person to overwork, and now they're working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. every day just so they don't think about the emotions they're experiencing. And so I would say that as you're a child and as this depression develops, it has the potential of becoming more extreme, more intensified. And that's why it's important to catch depression as soon as it comes up, especially for youth.
Thank you for that answer, Dr. Igwe.
All right, so in our comment section, I hope we don't lose Igwe somewhere. I'm just trying to look for her. Well, just she's like finally beginning to accept the obvious truth that people may want to kill themselves. Like what a breath of fresh air to just be acknowledging that. So I guess it was a comment, it wasn't a question. I just wanted to address that. That was a great point, Igwe. We can go on to our next question, please.
Yeah, let's take I believe Unwana Okon.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Brandon. And thank you so much, Dr. Iwe. My name is Owana Okon. I'm the outreach chair for Africa House. And I first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank the Africa House admin for asking that question on the statistics, and I'm going to get to that. But to the presenters and Mr. Luwago and the other lady, I skip her name. Sorry. I just want to say thank you so much because it is about time our own community we start to really hear about things like this or have a dialogue to address things like suicide and domestic violence. And I thank you guys for putting it together and bringing it to us. You know, they say if you live long enough, your child will start to train you. Thank you for training us, because that's what most of us wish for our children to be out there and to bring the knowledge back to us, whether we want to hear it or not. But this is the time. And on that note, I just say thank you so much. And on the statistics, we all know, or we might not all know, but some of us know that when it comes to some statistics, especially something negative, it's always the most in Africa. And the reason being that we are not the writers, we are not the historians of those information. Until we start being historians, it always would be the statistics of, suicide rate is much more in Africa, in Nigeria, whichever country, especially Nigeria, they want to pick Nigeria apart. Oh, it has the worst suicide rate, and everybody tag on that. First of all, I'm from Nigeria, and I know that if somebody commits suicide, we do not call the hospital and say, come and take a note of this, give a certificate, do this, or report to the national statistics. No, we don't. So my question, my comment is not a question. You guys will not be able to answer that. Where did they get such statistics? They always found something on Africa. Whenever something is addressed that is negative, it is Africa. Because we have been in this country, I've been here overseas, and I hear of so much suicide, even in very close to me with my co-workers, their families here. And they have that kind of thing, and they have that statistic. In the US, they keep all the statistics on things like this, but in Nigeria, we don't have that. So I would just say squash. Now that we are writing, now that we have you to be listening to this statistic, when you hear them, please do address it, because it's not true. I'm not saying that we do not have suicide in Africa. Yes, we do. We do have them, but we are not the worst, because there's suicide everywhere. And if we look closer to where we live, we can hear of one or two in a year or so. But having said that, I really, really appreciate you guys for taking this time to open up this dialogue in our community, because as you all know, those of you born here, you know that your parents including me, we do not sit down and talk about certain things to you. We might, somebody like me, I run my mouth to my son until he got tired. But, that being said, not a lot of people welcome that. They treat children as, don't be seen or don't do this. And then they, like you said, they force the kids to whatever they want them that they didn't learn, but they want the kids to learn that. And it is something that is ongoing until we can break that bond to allow a child to read or enjoy his life or her life, pursuing something that they want. We're still going to come around this circle. But thank you again. Thank you so very much. I hope this is a beginning. It's not going to be the end, that you guys will always call us back to the table to let us know what we need to know. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that we are above time, so I'll be really quick, but I just wanted to make a comment about the statistics, which I 100% agree. A lot of these statistics are not taken in by us. Some of them are taken in by us, but a lot of them aren't. I guess how I would reframe it a bit is kind of like, yes, a lot of times statistics are given to show, oh, look how poorly Africa is doing. 100% agree. And at the same time, I think this is also a call for us to notice that, hey, maybe we should collect more data, because as you said, there are people who die and we don't report those statistics. And so definitely being able to take suicide, depression more seriously within our countries. And so we can collect statistics, can collect more accurate data, see if the data is actually less, or maybe if it's even more. And so, yes, 100% agree. And thank you for sharing.
All right, so we are at the 6:30 mark, but I do see that we have 2 more questions. So I'll just say that if anybody needs to leave, you guys are more than welcome to leave. Dr. Igwe, I don't know if you have time for those last 2 questions. We can have them, ask their questions and get that answered as well, if you're okay. But if you need to leave, feel free to leave. There's no pressure to stay. If you want to continue having the conversation, yeah, we can keep going, because I believe this is an important topic for us to touch on, especially as Africans in the diaspora. So yeah, we'll go to iPhone next, if you have your question.
Yes, the iPhone, the name is Ubong Inyang, and I really want to thank you, Dr. Wazir, and everyone else that brought this together, and to thank Dr. Igwe. Igwe back home, we will say Igwe. Dr. King, I want to thank you so much, really, for hitting the nail on the point. I don't think really, if we were to tell the truth, that I believe every one of us has somebody that we know, even a friend that is depressed or has some kind of mental issue. If every family, yes. So this is a very crucial and very important topic that I'm hoping we can expand on if you have time at a later period. I also want to talk about the statistics. Each time a statistics is given about Africa, somehow we get angry that I see that people are trying to make us look bad. The point is, we already look bad. So I don't know why we think people are trying to make us. The point is, they are pointing out, somebody's pointing out that there is a problem. We should focus on the problem and not the statistics. Who cares about the statistics if we can come up with solutions right now? The issue at hand is an urgent one. It's a very important issue in Africa. Some people don't even care about this topic. It scares them. They don't want to discuss it with their children. Oh, it can't be my child. It can't be this. That's what we should focus on. Educating African parents before we even get to the kids. Because some of us don't want to believe that this is an issue. If it's left to me, statistics is nonsense. Somebody came and told us, hey, you have a problem in your home. Find out what the problem is and solve it. don't worry about whether you look bad or not. And thank you very much. That's all I have.
Yes, thank you for sharing, and 100% agree. I was talking to Brandon earlier about like how he had mentioned like the importance of getting parents involved, and I was like, yeah, like I work with kids, and like of course I could tell kids everything, but if I can't get parents on board, then the kids aren't really going to be able to take it all in because the parents are the people in charge. They're going to be able to help implement it, or they could tear down all of the work that we did, and so working against depression and suicide is not just a family effort, it is a community effort. We all need to be together and work towards protecting our youth. And so thank you so much for sharing.
It's amen to that. Yeah, the kids learn their coping mechanisms from their parents. And so it's up to the parents to develop good, healthy coping mechanisms so that they can teach them to their children. So we will go ahead and move on to the next question, Chris Okara.
Yeah. Okay. I have a comment, and I'll make mine very simple. First of all, Dr. Chiza Igwe, congratulations. I am really proud of you. You have developed academically and professionally. So good luck. My quick question is, when we talk about depression, the assumption is that it's only the youth, the children. In my opinion, I don't think so. Adults are also depressed. I am from Nigeria, and I'm from Igbo ethnic group. Most adults, especially those that live in diaspora, they trust relatives, friends back home. And oftentimes they make investments with the trust that they have about our people back home. I've seen some videos where people go home and their hopes are dashed because the people they trusted back home to invest or do something for them squander their resources. So my question on that is, they may be depressed, but I'm assuming, and I want you to confirm this, that at a particular point in time, they may be depressed, but depression does not last permanently. They can overcome that particular point in time, okay, and move on. But it doesn't stay with them permanently. I wanted you to confirm that. But again, thank you, and I wish you good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for everything. Around like adult depression, of course, we were focusing on youth today, but 100% adult depression, adult onset depression is definitely a thing. And not only that, elder depression as well. We are also in an epidemic for elder depression. So I want to acknowledge that as well. So thank you for bringing that up. In terms of whether or not depression is long-term or short-term, I might not give the most fitting answer, but I would say it depends. I think some people, they experience depression over a specific event or something else. And that depression happens for maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, maybe a year, but eventually they're able to do what they need to get up, move on, feel better. While with other people, depression might last a few years, maybe a decade, maybe a lifetime. So I think depression is different for everybody, especially if we look at depression in the terms of a specific event as opposed to clinical depression. I think those also weigh each other as well. It's very hard to also tell which types of depression will be lifetime and which types of depression will be short. Unfortunately, the science isn't there yet. But yeah, so it varies from person to person for sure. But yes, for some people, depression isn't an everything, all the time thing. It will get better.
Well, I guess that's it. iPhone, do you have any question? Because I think we did pick you. Are you just keeping your hand up? Hello. All right, so
I think that's this.
well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for guys for being here. I'm just happy to be part of this, as in the fact that we are having human interaction I just want to say it is not even new. This is what our ancestors used to do. They used to sit around and have conversations to just have human interaction and make themselves feel better. Now that we are in a different community, this community is very individualistic. So the whole stress of carrying on the burden by yourself can really be stressing and depressing. So I hope we can create again. The collectiveness is not new. Conversations were had with our ancestors. Thank you so much, Dr. Igwe.
Thank you.
I'm originally from Uganda, and I just want to thank Brandon and Dr. Anis for jumping me on here. I love everything mental health. I thrive with it because I know it makes me better as a person. And remember, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Fill your cup first so you can be able to take care of other people, okay? Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all your help. And please, we will post this on the website soon, including the slides. I hope Dr. we'll be able to have the slides we can post on the Africa House Sacramento website and the recording. If you wish to stay on our email list and also WhatsApp group, you can put your email address and phone number in the chat, and we will do that. Thank you very much. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brandon, Imani, Dr. Chizi. Thank you, guys. God bless you.
Thank you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Wade.
Igwe that called all the way from Nigeria, John. Thank you for dialing in.
Yes, I acknowledged him earlier as well. Yes.
Oh,
Be
John,
safe.
again.
Everyone be safe.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very proud of you, Dr. Chizi.
Thank
Yes.
Thanks very much.
It's lovely.
Well, I have an inbox from Helen. She said, great presentation, everyone.
All right. That's great.
Thank you, Dr.
Admin, you can turn the
recording
off. Yeah.
Good job. It's Nana. Was it?
You can see everybody.